Hello, and a very welcome to everyone, but a special welcome to everyone who lives in Georgia right now, because tonight's conversation is entitled All Eyes on the Georgia Senate Race. I'm Walter Powell, founder of Politiscope, and if you don't know what Politiscope is a nonpartisan player profile app that breaks down and explains every bill a politician votes for or against in a layman's terms. So taking all that convoluted information, consolidating it to one platform where you can register to vote, donate to politicians, track the hottest elections, even call your politician off the app and look at the hottest and follow them on all their social media. My team and I have created and continue to develop this app because we know the importance of politics and the importance of being really engaged and empowered with political information and just even the political process. The Senate race is extremely important, and tonight you will hear from some folks who can enlighten and empower us to do more. So without further ado, I'll let our moderator, Judith Wandu, take it from here. And let's get the show on the road. Thank you.
Hey everyone, happy 2020. I hope this year started off great for you all. As you can see, it's still Christmas where I'm at, but I just want to say thank you guys for joining us. So I'm Judith Wandu, and I'm a producer and political reporter. I'm also your moderator for today. If you check the Shade Room, you've seen me interview Joe Biden, Kamala Harris, Stacey Abrams, to name a few, and also one of our panelists today. So with that in mind, let's introduce the panelists. First one up is Leah Webb. She's an award-winning activist who has successfully bridged the gap between the community and local, state, federal government agencies to bring about positive and lasting change in her community. Her greatest achievement includes being elected as the first and youngest African-American representative in the Binghamton City Council. Let's all welcome Leah.
Good evening. Well, hey, everybody. Glad to be here.
Hey, glad to have you. And our next one up is Lee Merritt. This is the one who stepped into the Shade Room. He is the civil rights activist and attorney. He runs a high-profile practice focusing on victims of police brutality, hate crimes, and corporate discrimination. As an activist, he has championed police reform and community empowerment. And in 2017, he was recognized as one of the top 10 most influential African Americans in the country, ages 18 to 45 by The Root. Hey, Lee.
Hey, good to see you again, Judith, and so excited to be here talking about Georgia elections.
Yes, of course. Thanks for coming. And our last but not least panelist is Jay Brandon. He most recently simultaneously led both a New York City-based census campaign and an Atlanta-based voter registration initiative. As the Civic Engagement and Community Partnerships Manager at the NYC Public Library, with the outreach team in Atlanta, Georgia, he co-led efforts to register over 5,000 new voters.
Hi, everyone. Hey, Judith, Leah, Lee.
Hey, guys. All right, well, we can get started. Do I see some comments rolling in? Yes, we do. Awesome. We got some people who are excited for the conversation. So we'll get to the first question. This one is mostly for you, Jay and Leah. Were any of you actively involved in voter outreach in Georgia? And can either of you guys tell us about your involvement and impact briefly?
Leah, you want to go first?
Sure. Well, again, thank you so much for having me here for this great discussion. I'm excited to be here with this esteemed panel of leaders. So I'm the vice chair of the Black Millennial Convention, one of the co-founders, and we have been working with organizers on the ground in Georgia over for the past month. And so we actually initiated an initiative called Adopt a Precinct, where we are specifically focusing on underserved communities in Georgia. So in places such as Albany, Macon, Savannah, Augusta, the metro Atlanta area, Macon, I think I said Columbus already, Athens, to really ensure that Black and brown voters in those communities are most certainly turning out to vote in this important election. And so we've been working on things. We actually have an event tonight that we're co-sponsoring with organizations like Vote called Trap at the Polls, where we're really pushing for folks to most certainly turn out to vote. But also we recognize we're in the middle of a pandemic and our communities have been devastated. And so folks can actually get PPE materials and also food as well. So those are just a few of the things that we've been doing, most certainly through Black Millennial Convention in Georgia.
I want to be clear, it's called Trap at the Polls.
Trap at the polls. Yes.
I love it.
Yeah, there's before I get inside, there's a lot of like those I would say those hood euphemisms, being incorporated into political outreach right now, and it's so exciting. I was on Clubhouse earlier and got involved in a room where Move Mitch is a social media trend that's going on right now. If you want to follow me on Instagram, I've posted it. I've changed my profile picture to Move Mitch. So it's all a part of this collective movement. And so to respond to the initial question, yeah, I was actually on the ground in Atlanta back in September, trying to urge as many people to be registered to vote. I specifically worked as a part of a campaign targeting Black and Brown communities in Gwinnett, Fulton, and Cobb County to register. We got over 5,000 new folks registered to vote. And I'm actually still working on a campaign now with Georgia Stand Up Core targeting LGBTQ community members and allies like myself to, be supporting issues right now in this January 5th runoff. So I've been out there. I'm still out there. It's impactful that, we keep this conversation going. None of us would have thought that we would be in this situation right now where we'd be having a runoff election tomorrow for two Georgia races, two U.S. Senate races in Georgia to be specific. But yet we recognize that potentially those 5,000 that were registered with the outreach team and others that were registered through efforts at Leah, Stacey Abrams, New Georgia Project, all those other organizations, put into place back in the summer and through the fall, and even after the deadline in October, to get to where we're at now, to where we're seeing that a great deal of those voting in the early vote in the Georgia Senate races are people who did not vote in November and are first-time voters. So it is highly important that we keep this conversation going.
Yes, it is highly important.
I'm curious, the Move Mitch campaign, what age demographic does that touch? Because I know what Move Mitch is referring to.
I would say maybe the mid 30s, early 40s age range population. But one thing I think is to recognize is that we know, whether we want to look at raw numbers or not, that a large number of us are not paying attention to the conversation. So I remember back over the summer, I saw the stripper campaign in Atlanta that they had the video out urging people to vote. And I remember some of the conversation around it at first was like, oh, why are they doing it? How do we, how does that play into the political conversation? And myself, I even immediately took a step back and said, no, that is getting some more people a part of this conversation. And we can look at it as a little like, out of place and whatnot. But I can tell you, I was so excited to see Georgia flip. When they called it a couple of days after the election, there was excitement there. And I said, all of that, the strippers to the polls and the traps to the polls, all that contributed to being able to have this conversation now and sitting in a place where Georgia went blue.
And Judith, I know you didn't direct this question to me, but I know we're sort of just popcorn styling it. But in Texas, we haven't had as much, where I'm based out of, there hasn't been an organization on the ground, and there was hopes to flip Texas. So I'm with Jay, whatever it takes, by any means necessary to get a larger voter turnout for our group. I know that there is a church structure that remains in place in most communities. That there's a local church, and I was actually speaking with I believe Bill Bellamy and AJ Calloway earlier. And they've set up, if you go to turnoutsunday.com, you can volunteer to be a chaplain at the polls tomorrow on Tuesday. I thought the website was kind of misleading because it says Turnout Sunday, but it's referring to the church, Turnout Sunday, and sign up to be a chaplain. And there's major concern in Georgia about voter suppression, voter intimidation, and people watching those ballots. So if you want your church to be about part of that, go to www.turnoutsunday.com.
Nice. Okay. Thanks for that, Lee. And for anybody watching who's just kind of confused about why this, because we all were experienced November 3rd, right? Or that week of November 3rd, shall we say. It was nail biting for some, for everyone. And people are like, okay, this thing in, we got 2020 pouring into 2021, but they want to know, they might want to know. I know I have some friends watching who might want to know who we are. Why are we having another election in Georgia specifically? And who are the key players? And why is this so important? And why are all eyes on Georgia right now?
Who wants to take that?
Okay.
I can say this. I will say this without getting into the specifics of the Georgia election, that I had the opportunity to speak before the United States Senate this summer. And when I spoke before the Senate, it was for the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act. The idea is that we want to get to end qualified immunity, which was a special set of protections offered to law enforcement officers that other defendants don't receive. It was a judicially created exception. And we also wanted to see greater accountability on criminal accountability on behalf of law enforcement officers from the federal departments, from the Department of Justice, without getting into the specifics. That bill was not passed. We could not come to an agreement. There was no bipartisan agreement to get even a portion of that bill passed. However, the two remaining Senate seats in Georgia will tilt the balance of power in the Senate. So it is critically important. If we want to see all the protests and all the marching and all the awareness from the summer bear any fruit, then this election will play a major role in that.
Yes, exactly. So like you said, oh, I'm sorry.
I do want to speak to that real quick because I feel like the work that I do, I've worked in advocacy campaigns, electoral campaigns in representative office as well. And what I feel like where my career is at now is really trying to close some of these gaps that we have in our people understanding the political process. I think that's why this app Politiscope is so dope. When I first heard about it was to, just feed this information in a way that people could just, every day understand. I feel like that question comes from a sense of why are we still in this, why are we still having this conversation here on January 5th? And it's a valid question. And my real response to that is I want more of us to pay attention to these conversations. This runoff, we could realistically say, is a benefit to the conversation of being able to make more progress happen over the next 4 years. So we've benefited potentially from it in this moment. The results of that will bear those fruit. However, we're in this position of a runoff because it's an outdated system we're still playing in. And I firmly believe if more of us started to pay attention and be involved in what's going on and take part in these conversations, we'll start to shift a new dynamic in which we politics. I think 2020 showed us a lot of that, and we're in this moment now with 2021 where we could take advantage of some of that momentum that was established at.
And I would just add that from the other part of your question around who were the key players, I would definitely say Black and brown voters, because to be quite candid, we wouldn't even be having a runoff election right now had it not been more specifically for Black and brown women voters and young voters. If you looked at, so one of the things that we do at Black Millennial Convention, we spend a lot of time honing in on young Black voters. And if you look at the past election, voters between the ages of 18 to 44 made up 40% of the electorate. And then when you look at Georgia, Black young voters made up 21% of the voting bloc in Georgia, right? And so it is really due in part to, I would say, those key demographics. But I also think, I want to piggyback off of both what Lee and Jay have mentioned already, is that we also need to understand the electoral process, how it is currently structured. It is most certainly flawed, right? It wasn't designed for our folks, but it's important that we utilize this tool to really have, and more importantly, activate our power. As Jay said, that if these two Senate seats move in a direction towards, how Georgia has been turned blue, then that could potentially alter the course on a lot of issues that are impacting our communities. Things such as we already mentioned, criminal justice issues, law enforcement, police brutality. I mean, we're in the midst of a pandemic due to COVID, and our communities have been devastated. I mean, families are literally losing jobs, don't have access to quality health care. Things that were already pervasive in our communities have just become so exacerbated. And so it's important for us, not just in Georgia, but across the country and our communities, to understand who are these respective leaders that ultimately have major influence on these issues that impact our daily lives. And so this election tomorrow in Georgia, from a governance standpoint, is very critical on a number of issues, ushering us into not only just 2021, but for the next several years.
Okay, yeah, that's definitely true. I think that one of the things that you mentioned earlier, basically, we have a lot of these issues in our community, right? And do you think that some of these issues that have kind of come to a head, police brutality and racial discrimination across the board, but also, with COVID, just seeing like how our communities have just been hit the hardest and nobody cares. It seems like, just to some people, like nobody cares. Do you think that that is part of why Black voter participation and people are focusing on Black voters so heavy in this election cycle? Do you think that that's kind of like why people are seeing that boom? Because 2020 was like throughout the year with George Floyd and everything, and Ahmaud Arbery and Breonna Taylor, everything, it was just so focused on Black issues. And I don't know, like just a flip side of the coin, like, do you see it as a positive thing? Like, okay, this is a time for people to start to decide, okay, we want change. Voting is our first way of getting that change, basically. Like, that's kind of how we can just exercise our rights, make sure that at the policy level, things are changing and stuff like that. How do you guys basically perceive that? You know what I mean? Like, this last year that we just came out of, 2020, and like, what do you think are some key factors that drove maybe Black communities to the polls?
Sure. I believe that there was a national awakening this year, an awakening to the failures of our criminal justice system, awakening to the lack of accountability for law enforcement officers when they violate the law, for certain demographics in our community when Black folks are targeted. And we've seen the videos, and people finally stood up and they said that they were tired of it. But one of the solutions that was repeatedly offered to us as a community, as a place to vent our frustration, was in the polls. And so Black people wanted to not only show up to the polls, but they wanted to have candidates on both sides saying how they would remedy these very real, these very systemic issues. Just earlier today, I received a motion in the Ahmaud Arbery case. In the defense attorneys in that case, they requested that the court not refer to Ahmaud Arbery as the victim during the course of the trial.
Oh, we posted about that on the Shade Room. We're like, right. Wow.
Yeah, they're hoping to get back to the old normal, that things will go back to usual, the new year, new beginnings, and we can just scrub away all the protests and all the awareness and consciousness of 2020. And they're hoping that it wouldn't be discussed on the Shade Room and other areas or on Politiscope. It's our responsibility, I believe, now to really pay attention, to not say that wasn't for a season. It wasn't for a moment, but this is a movement and it's a lifetime commitment that we are now, as a generation and as a voting bloc, a conscious, aware group of people, and we're going to vote our conscience. We're going to vote our issues, and we're not going to fall asleep at the wheel just because it's a new year.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Lee, you wanted to add?
No, I was just going to say, to Lee's point, not only was it a national outcry, but a global, and that was something we've never seen, the amount of not just national, but international attention on the Black experience here in America. And what I think is so critical for folks, while we are pushing folks to vote, voting is just a tool. It is not the only tool. And the big piece that comes after that is the accountability and how you continue the message, the demands, that were augmented during the protests is right now. We are in the first 100 days. And this is where, Politiscope, apps like this are very critical because it can provide education around we're in the first 100 days. Appointments are happening, not just at the federal level, but all the way down. And so, again, who are these folks that we have not only voted for, but who are they appointing to have jurisdiction over policies and practices, and how are they determining their priorities? And we need to be right now making those meeting requests with our elected officials from every level to ensure that our issues are being addressed, not just during election, but beyond the election. And that's where the real, the continuation, I should say rather, happens with the accountability. It's what are the policy priorities? What are you going to pass in this legislative session? How are you working on addressing issues such as COVID that's having impacts across every institution? And so I think that in looking at this kind of, to your question around,
or some people wanted to know, I know that this has been topics, it's been nicknamed the STEMI now, but people want to know, do you support that $2,000 stimulus or not?
No, I mean, we all know, I don't want to speak for everyone, but that's really, if you look at, again, we were experiencing major job loss and unemployment rates in our communities for a very long time, and most certainly got exacerbated by COVID. That 2000 is a step. It is not a complete solution, because we really need to get at the equity piece around what are the equitable policies we're putting in place across these institutions to make sure that our families are not just receiving a one-time stimulus, but in fact are having continuous opportunities to have a better quality of life. And so, I know that was a major issue that has gained a lot of attention, especially the last couple of weeks, where the Senate hadn't voted on the stimulus bill. Was being held. Some folks framed it as being held hostage or being held as a political tool, right? And so I think what we're also seeing, but people turning out, is that again, our needs need to be met. And so having leadership that not only understands that and says it during an election, but actively is working on it in their respective roles is something that is going to be critically important, not just for January 5th, but moving forward. I know, Jay, you're getting ready to add some things, so I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, carry on, please, because I think it all supports what I was going to start with. So I've been saying for a few years now that progressive social change comes to the door of Blackness. So to me, that's it's a real recognizing, understanding of historically what America has looked like. We don't get the benefits of it, but it comes through us having to advocate for it. In that, we can also recognize that everything is a Black issue. Everything being a Black issue means that it's a collective issue. And it being a collective issue, we each play a part in making this change happen that we want to see. And in recognizing that we have to hold those that we elect accountable. Again, I talked about this being an outdated system. It doesn't support us. It doesn't benefit us. We have to be a part of the conversation, so to start shifting these narratives. When we look at the COVID-19 response, when we look at just the impact alone, it is damaging the Black community first and foremost. When we look at the recovery or the equity pieces that are supposed to help us through, we still weren't given access to those PPP programs, loans and grants. All the other recovery efforts, still are not targeting us in an equitable way that is really to address the issues that impact us, how they impact us, not address the issues how they just are. We look at that, in the conversation around, whether, vaccines are going to be taken in the Black community. Nothing is being spoken to, though, of the history of mistrust that is in the community that supports why folks are against it. Going back to just more people being a part of the conversation. If we look at historically, the last time the U.S. federal government gave out a stimulus check, they gave out $600 as well. That was during the Great Recession, during the end of the George Bush years. I think that was like their immediate response was to give out folks $600. And if we look at this moment now, where we're in this moment where they're again looking to hand out money, they're turning around for something far worse, far bigger, and giving us the same $600, and it doesn't go far enough. We've been in this situation.
And inflation, maybe not too great, but still, like
exactly the cost of living increased with it. So, it's those things that go into, recognizing that we have to be paying attention. This moment that we're galvanized, I talked about this early part of 2020. It's like, this was supposed to be the moment to relax. And unfortunately, we don't have this space and opportunity to relax. Hopefully the results will come out by no later than Wednesday, Thursday, and maybe we can take a break from then till the 20th. But we have to remember that 2020 and all the time in between from whenever to this moment here is calling for us to be more active, more engaged, to be tapping into apps like Politiscope, be tapping into other folks, having these conversations when these events are happening, and making sure that we're not taking, the accountability away from, those individuals that we elected.
Right. To your point, we do not get the results tomorrow. We do have to wait some time for them to actually calculate the votes in Georgia. But, when they're calculating it, if it's down to the wire, which we'll get to that point soon, about polling, if it is down to the wire, you want to know that your vote really did count. So yes, it's kind of a miniature, probably shorter repeat of the actual election in November. So the presidential election. But speaking of things being down to the wire, national statewide polling is something that obviously drives conversation during all these election cycles. Like 2016 was totally off. 2020 was correct, but by a thinner margin for Joe Biden leading Trump. Now we're seeing polls say that Democrat John Ossoff leads Republican Senator David Perdue by just under 2%, and Democrat Raphael Warnock leads Republican Senator Kelly Loeffler by just over 2%. So that's really close. Is there any speculation as to which way this will swing based off of polls having a history of being incorrect, or, just enlighten us a little bit?
I will speculate, and it's just from my experience as an American living in this country for the past few years. The margin of error has been wide enough to drive a Mack truck through. That's including in the past election where, the overall outcome may have come out as the pollsters predicted from the top of the ticket, but certainly not from the ticket on down. There was no major blue wave. There was a greater deal of voter participation, and this is a good thing. We saw more people, Republican or Democrat or undecided, turn out to the polls than we've ever had in American history. This was a historic election, and that's a good thing. However, because we're seeing historic numbers and we're seeing people even aware of runoff elections, historically, Democrats don't fare well in runoff elections. But in this particular race, people have remained tuned in. They've remained focused. We're still talking about it. It's still the number one story in the media right now, and it's made its way to the dinner tables as well. People understand that this election and these elections have impacted them, and so I don't know that we can rely on the pollsters at all. They poll from likely voters, and we don't know what the impact of the Trump presidency or Trump being voted out of the White House essentially will have on likely voters in Georgia. We don't know what impact this recent leaked phone call of him bullying the state official and telling him that he needs to go find votes, whether that will drive people to the polls, whether it will rally his base or make his base ashamed and make them want to stay home. We don't know. And so I think the pollsters and the data is out of the window.
I have to agree. I think for a few reasons that the numbers are off is who are they talking to is the question, the conversation. I think, we have to ask when we start looking at polling data is what segment of the American population are they polling as they do this? Yes, you can look at if you done any sort of research into polling science, they're supposed to, look at a broad swath of people. But in that, again, it's who are they talking to in those broad swaths of people? And if you really looked at the data, it's not a real representation of the country most times. So I think, that field and industry is really going to have some conversation. And I've heard, this talked about folks who work in that field about, what polling looks like going forward. For this conversation, for this moment, I think to piggyback off of what Lee said, recognizing that this is an opportunity to be a part of the conversation now. Folks may not have, voted in November 3rd and looked at it and said, oh, okay, this is still happening. I'm going to take, part of it. That's what's important, is that you take, advantage of the next election that's coming up. To that, though, I will say for me, I think this is the perfect response for those of us who work in politics, and we come across those people who say, yeah, my vote's not going to count, or it's not going to matter. Somebody else is going to do it. This is the perfect anecdotal moment to show, because people didn't turn out and vote, because people didn't continue to vote down ballot, we see ourselves, in this position of a runoff. We do have the opportunity to, take this moment and shoot for the stars with it. So I'm hoping that, that more than the 3 million Georgians that have gone out and voted already come out tomorrow, and potentially double that number. But, just looking at the opportunities to say, this is the election that's happening tomorrow. I'm going to take advantage of it. And then I'm going to keep being a part of this conversation.
Yeah.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. And our folks tend to, turn up, early voting. But on election day, that's where, again, like, Lee said, it could go either way. What I think is going to be critically important, that regardless of which way the election turns out, is that we cannot afford to lose the momentum with respect to holding any of these elected officials accountable, regardless of their partisan affiliation. I would also say that it is imperative that we educate ourselves continuously around what are those tools that we have at our disposal beyond just the tool of voting to really push for change. As we've seen with the protest conversations that elected officials have been having around policies, things like, oh, we can never pass these kinds of legislation. We don't have enough support. As the saying goes, the squeaky wheel gets the grease. And most certainly our communities all over this country have said, especially a lot of young people are saying, like, we're not taking this anymore. And what also made this moment interesting is that even in the Georgia election, you have a lot of folks, this was their first time voting ever, meaning like this is their first time actually being able to qualify to vote. And so now for some folks, this is their first time being able to vote because age-wise, they weren't eligible. So now they can vote. So there's a number, I say all that to say there's a number of factors that can, push this election outcome either way. But I think what's critically important is that regardless of that we continue to galvanize and educate, inform, and empower our folks around what are those ways in which we can really continue to push for change.
Yeah, definitely. I think the people whose birthdays came from November 3rd to January 5th, what is those? Scorpios, Sagittarius.
Scorpio, little Sagittarius season.
They go back a month too as well. So it's quite a few months in there, zodiac signs in there that now have that opportunity tomorrow to make their voices heard. Yeah.
And then how can you predict how a Scorpio or a Sagittarius will vote? They can't make up their minds.
Yeah, we're filling all the bubbles. But okay.
I find it amazing that we all have this conversation about how we can predict the polls, and none of us mentioned that there's a historic pandemic occurring, and that would impact, how well we can predict the polls, right? And so there's so much going on in the nation that the pandemic, it seems like one of a secondary issue. It's amazing.
That's real.
Right. That's why hopefully a lot of, if you guys are watching and you guys are Georgia voters, hopefully you guys already voted early. But if not, of course you guys can do that tomorrow. Lee, so I want to talk to you because obviously as a major activist. You've got your eyes on some of the things that our president-elect and VP-elect have promised on the campaign trail that could actually impact what Leah mentioned. I would say is kind of like the squeaky oil that's getting the wheel. This year, what was the wheel? It was just all things Black issues. Jay, you mentioned Black issues are everyone's issues, right? So based off of this spotlight now that are on Black issues and based off of what Biden and Harris had promised in their campaign trail, how likely, or what are some things that you're hoping can, like some legislation that you're hoping could get passed specifically around police brutality cases or around just, you know, the lynchings like Ahmaud Arbery in Georgia and stuff like that? Like, what legislation are you hoping this Georgia election can actually impact in the Senate?
I would love to see the Senate take a more hands-on approach to reforming the criminal justice system that we all have acknowledged over the summer was flawed. When I had a chance to sit down with Republican Senator Tim Scott, when I had a chance to sit down with the Attorney General, when I had a chance to sit down with Trump himself, everyone agreed that there were major issues with policing in America. The solutions we all couldn't agree on. And so the Senate, of course, each time, on both sides of the aisle, feigned that if only their colleagues on the Democratic end would join them on their legislation, then we could see real reform pass. And in reverse, the Democrats said the same thing. Well, if only we get these 2 Senate positions. There are actions that every senator can take right now. You start. I want to see more comprehensive legislation come out of the Congress, not only geared at reform, not only geared at banning the chokehold or banning no-knock warrants, all very essential things, or even the high prize that I mentioned earlier, which is ending qualified immunity. And all of those are aspects of the Justice and Policing Act or the George Floyd Act, one offered by the conservative Republicans and the other offered by the Democrats. But we can go further than that. We know that there was a group of laws like, for example, the 94 crime bill that was passed specifically designed to accelerate the largest prison industrial complex in human history. That these set of laws that were passed over a period of since the late 1960s, that these laws were specifically designed to target Black communities, to fight a so-called war on drugs that essentially amounted to a war on Black and brown people. I think it's imperative on the Senate, on both sides of the aisle, to end the so-called war on drugs and then do the restorative work to bring those communities back. So it's not just enough, as my brother Malcolm said, to pull the knife out of the back a little bit, but to pull that knife all the way out of the back and then do the repair work. My father, to this day, sits in a prison cell that is being infested, a prison that is undergoing a surge in COVID cases. He's in a prison cell because he suffers from an addiction, a sickness, and we need to stop treating. And our legislation has an opportunity to stop treating sick and poor people like they're criminal. It's interesting. I mentioned earlier that the attorneys in Ahmaud Arbery's case, the defense attorneys, they don't want to refer to him as victim because in our nation, we don't see Black people as victims. We don't see them as human. Our laws don't treat them as human. They'd rather treat Ahmaud Arbery like the suspect, although he was shot to death by men while going for a jog. They'd rather treat people like my father and our friends and our neighbors as suspects and as criminals, just by virtue of the color of their skin itself. We know that we have a criminal justice system that demonstratively treats you different if you're poor and Black than if you're rich and white, and that there are things that we can do congressionally, new laws that we can pass if we take on the initiative, but also with the incoming administration, if they take that commitment themselves, they can immediately expand the role of the Department of Justice to do pattern and practice investigations all over the country, to root out corrupt police departments, to punish bad police officers, and then they can go about doing the specific work of undoing the damage caused by decades and decades of penalizing Blackness itself.
I just want to add to that really quickly, just to talk about the impact of this moment. And what's really at stake here when we look at, the cabinet confirmations and the confirmation of secretaries and how influential the federal government is. To use another example that doesn't have anything to do with criminal justice reform and then bring it back to criminal justice reform, we have the way the interstate highways are set up, and we have, minimum speed limits around the country due in part to the federal government incentivizing states to implement highway speed limit laws throughout this country. That's a part of the reason why we have it is the federal government incentivizing through grants and through money to states to implement things like that. So the way the federal government is impactful in this moment is it provides an opportunity not only through legislation, but through cabinet secretaries and through the work that they do to be influential on state and local government. To even go a step further beyond, the criminal justice reform, demilitarizing local and state police departments. There's no reason why police forces around this country have the equipment and utilize the equipment in the manner in which they do. We live in American streets, and there's no reason why the NYPD, the LAPD, or any other police department has military-style weapons and armament. So looking at all that's on the ballot right now, all that's at stake, it's imperative, again, that we look at everything as a Black issue, and when we look at it as a Black issue, it's a collective issue.
Yeah, and most certainly, school, especially you think about K through 12, is remote learning, and even in higher education institutions. And so I think this is also a very critical issue around, like, what are we doing to both Jay and Lee's point, and looking at these appointments, who are the folks that are being charged with looking at how do we in 2021, with everything being virtual and most certainly education being one, how are we ensuring that all of our students are able to learn in quality environments and take into account disparities that exist in institutions such as education. I would also say, it's time to reimagine. BMC, we are big supporters of the Breathe Act, most certainly, that was created and being led by a movement for Black lives. And I think this is an opportunity for us to really continue to push the envelope around reimagining not only what our criminal justice system looks like, our healthcare system, educational system. Now is the time to do that. And if we don't, and a lot of the sentiment that was shared and still shared now in the political outcry is that people are tired of incremental change. We can find ways to incentivize billionaires to continue to have all these major tax breaks, but yet we have families in our own communities who are literally dependent upon food pantries and can't even get to them in some cases because they're quarantined due to COVID. So where are we balancing our priorities as a nation around ensuring that our communities get equitable access to the resources that they need? And it's not just at the federal level. Our local and state officials have a lot of power. Even if you look at, who is appointing, we have mayors that have been elected in this cycle. They have direct jurisdiction over police departments, right? Along with city council. Your school board has direct jurisdiction over the ways in which our children get educated. Student loans are major problems. That's been something that was talked about during the election. I know for a lot of young folks and for folks who got them student loans, having that student loan, taking off your financial obligation can allow you an opportunity to invest in other places. And so there's a whole slew of issues that can be addressed, most certainly with this new year with leadership, not just at the federal level, but all the way down. And I just think that we have to continue publicly stating, calling out, applying that pressure on our leadership to ensure that they do, as our good brother Spike Lee said, the right thing. So.
Right. And this will be the last question. That was a great point from all of you guys. Do the right thing. In order for our, I would say, not our community, just like Black communities across the country and young people and all kinds of voters to actually see some change, based off of what we've been whoever we elect or whatever, we have to kind of hold them to the fire, like you said. So what are some ways, before we go, you guys could say like some ways that people can get involved without having, in addition to voting, they can, how can we hold them to the fire? Because once we vote, a lot of us feel like we're silenced, like we don't have a voice against the midterm elections in 2022. So what are some other ways that people can stay active and stay on these people, whoever gets elected in Georgia, and of course, people who are elected nationally?
Yeah, I'll go ahead, Lee.
I just think this is the year of doing it our damn selves, right? And so I encourage people to do like Leah did and run for office and hold your own position. I'll shout out now my brother Gary Chambers, who is running for Congress out of Louisiana. I believe that we actually have the solutions to the problems that we have. When it's no longer time to wait for people to come up with the solutions for us. I will shout out the Biden administration, who took a time and met with my group, Grassroots Law Project, who partners with Politiscope, and they listened to one of our concerns, and one of our major suggestions was we wanted to see the bench, the federal bench, have more defense attorneys and civil rights attorneys who get promoted to the bench, because right now the bench is made up mostly of prosecutors who have spent their entire careers feeding into the largest prison industrial complex in human history. That's where their mind is. And the Biden administration has agreed to do that and on the eve of this election, this is really important, if the senators refer them. So contact your local senators, put your hat in the ring if you're an attorney, if you're a defense attorney or a civil rights attorney, think about taking a position with the bench. And if you know qualified defense or civil rights attorneys, contact your senators. You can go to my page and click the link, contact your senators and make those recommendations and make sure that you are actually physically yourself a part of the process. You are the solution to the problems you see.
Okay, now we're going to go to audience questions. Thank you guys so much for every bit of knowledge that you guys have shared so far, but our audience is a little curious. So the first question from Gmo, hope I'm saying it right, is how does this race impact the midterm election in 2022? So if Dems go too far left in the Senate, will they lose the House?
I'll actually start taking that, because I want to say that I'm not currently working on anyone's campaign or for any organization. I can speak a little freely to this. Where we're at right now is we saw that the gains that they thought were going to be made in the House and the Senate not come to fruition, where we're having this conversation because of this runoff election tomorrow. I want to encourage those who are having this conversation not to look big picture. For those who don't do this work on a regular basis, who are not in the weeds of it, don't worry about the big picture. Start focusing on those local, the local aspects of the politics that are happening, because that's what that impact is going to be. That's where that impact is going to be felt the most. And in that, looking at the Senate candidates, if there's a race in your state, or looking at the House candidates in your congressional districts about who you're connected to and how those local issues are impacting you. For those who are, working in this space and looking at it, big picture, I think we have to have some realistic conversations about, again, who's on the bench, and again, how they reflect the actual stance and position of America and where people actually are. Just because you identify as a Democrat doesn't mean that your views are solely looked at as this one position, or if you're a Republican, you look at views in this one position. Start focusing on the local. Start connecting with people that represent your issues, and even if they don't directly reflect your issues, start talking to them about reflecting your issues and see what conversations are able to come from that.
Yeah, I would agree. I would also just add that, I mentioned this a little while ago, administrations from federal all the way down local always talk about the infamous first 100 days. I'm going to lay out my priorities in the first 100 days. And this is the time that we should be continuing to demand and request those meetings, continue to get the word out, educating ourselves, running for office, as Lee already alluded to. I also think that it's important that we continue to build and connect in community. And here's why. There's saying by our ancestor Frederick Douglass that power concedes nothing without demand. We need to build the critical mass to push for that demand. And so that requires us to even think of our own strategies around not just simply running for office, but you can get appointed to different positions. How are we, making and becoming leaders in different institutions, whether it's, our nonprofit sectors, private sectors, like how are we fully infiltrating these respective seats of power that influence our daily lives? Media is another example, right? And so that's why I appreciate what you do, Judith, is like, how are we ensuring that our stories are getting told, right? When we are having, these horrific experiences, whether it's due to COVID or racism that's displaying itself through police brutality, disparities in our educational system, climate change, right? What's happening in Flint, Michigan still to this day, our stories are not getting told. So how are we ensuring that we are getting our stories told around what is really impacting our communities? And so we can't underestimate the power of continuing to build coalition and educating ourselves. And that's why, again, I appreciate, what Politiscope is trying to do with regards to informing and educating folks around the political process. But then we have to take it that step further and see how does that display itself in the day-to-day institutions that we all are a part of.
Yeah, okay. And now we got our next question from Victoria. So Victoria Cotter said, understanding that there's so many disparities and lack of access to information in our communities, how can we encourage individuals to stay engaged when political action is a hot button topic?
So my background is in organizing, and I'm a big believer in you have to meet people where they are. You have to meet people where they are. If, for instance, I'm a member of my local NAACP, and for a lot of folks who may not, in the community, who may not be paying attention to the elections that are happening, but they know that right now that they are literally dependent upon a food pantry to put food on the table, you have to connect the dots between their experience, right? Listening and affirming, but also helping folks understand, well, why is it that you are having this experience? Like, what has led to this experience that we are collectively having? And so we have to start there, in our barbershops, hair salons, even in our own families, right? Having those conversations to ascertain what are people's self-interest, and then transitioning that to what is our shared interest, and how do we, again, build community and unify to push for change. And so for some folks, climate change may not be an issue, but they know that having dirty water is a problem. They can't make food, right? So getting people to even understand, like literally connecting those dots between these respective problems that they are having, or issues, and how it connects, and ultimately who has the power or decision-making authority around that. And that requires ongoing education. One of the things that I think becomes a challenge is that we have all this momentum built up for a national election, for instance, or a presidential election. And then it's like, okay, we elected y'all, go on and do what you said you were going to do, and not recognizing that these folks are a part of the system that was designed to maintain the status quo. So this requires us to continuously, there's elections that happen all year round. As Jay said, there are local elections that have some real consequences and jurisdiction over issues that impact us every day. And so this requires us in this moment, looking forward, to continue to have those conversations, push for those small victories that can happen all year round.
Okay. And Victoria said, that's a great point. Make the tangible connections. So you already helped somebody out here today. So Lee, starting with you, I want to give each of you panelists an opportunity to leave the audience with just a piece of wisdom in 20 seconds, and also plug any projects you have coming up or social.
Well, the first thing I want to plug is the project that I'm working on with Politiscope itself. Politiscope is designing and has designed a mechanism for tracking each case, not only that I'm involved in, but each of these civil rights cases that we've heard about over the summer, over the past year. There are names that have become household names like Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, and George Floyd. There are other names like Ronald Green or Michael Dean or Cameron Lamb out of Kansas City that most of us will not have heard of, but they impact people in your region. Politiscope will have a case tracker that will follow each one of these cases and provide you updates. A phenomenon that I kind of got used to as a civil rights attorney was serious involvement at the beginning of an incident. When that video of Ahmaud Arbery came out, the world turns its attention to this case. And that generally has a 30 or 60-day life shelf, and then it goes away. And the next time you hear it is at the time of the trial, when you hear the verdict of not guilty, and people are upset, and they're upset for just a little while again. Politiscope is taking that on as an issue by working with civil rights attorneys across the country to have a case tracker that follows and provides updates and ways that you can get involved in these cases. I am so excited that everyone is still paying attention to this runoff election. Candidly, this is the first runoff election that I've probably paid attention to in a long time. I want us all to remain this engaged, to stay focused, and I'm begging any of you, if you're in Georgia, please go out and vote. And as Judith, I believe you said, just because how Georgia is set up, you're only a couple of degrees separated from a Georgia voter. So encourage your family and friends to go out and vote, post about it, and stay involved.
Awesome. Okay. What about you, Jay?
I'm going to plug a few things. One, if you're a Georgia voter, 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. is the hours of the polls tomorrow. If you need information on your specific voter registration status, sos.ga.gov is the place to go. If you have issues at the poll tomorrow, if you are in line by 7 p.m. there, at the location time, you should be allowed to vote. So if you have issues, call 866-OUR-VOTE. Again, that's 866-OUR-VOTE. I just want to encourage folks to be a part of these conversations. Right now, like I said, I'm not working on anything. So I'm available to have more conversations. So if you want to talk about politics, want to talk about how to get engaged, feel free to hit me up. Row Republic is right there. I just want more of us, people that look like myself, that grew up in the same neighborhoods like I did, who I can connect to just by looking at them and giving them a head nod. We know what's up sometimes, to just be more a part of this conversation. I don't have all the answers. The folks that I work with don't have all the answers. But what we do have is space that we can start talking about these things, and we can collectively come up with solutions. So remember, tomorrow is January 5th. There are two U.S. Senate runoff election races happening in Georgia. So just encourage everyone to get out and vote.
Nice. Okay. Thank you for all that info, Jay, as well. And Leah, what about you?
I have to follow after them. Okay, I see how it happens out here. All right. So again, I just want to encourage everybody in Georgia to please vote. I know that I've been seeing some things where folks have been saying that they haven't gotten their ballot. If you do have it, I wouldn't even mail it at this point. Literally take it right in. That is going to be very important. You can also track your ballot status. Again, Jay mentioned this earlier, give some time, because we more than likely will not know the election results by tomorrow. So it's important that I know folks will be looking for folks to help with making sure that all the votes get counted, all that good stuff. So please, consider volunteering with great organizations such as the New Georgia Project, Woke Vote, etc. My organizations, both the Black Millennial Convention, as I said, we've been working with organizers down in Georgia. We are truly committed to building Black political power for Black millennials. So we do a slew of trainings around helping people to know how to run for office, how to push for equitable policy. Another organization I'm a part of, our Black Party, is pushing to get more Black folks elected in office across all levels. And so, follow both of those organizations at BMC Movement and, of course, at our Black Party. Most importantly, I just encourage everyone to please take care of yourselves. This COVID-19 is no joke. I have lost several people through this pandemic. It is very real. So it's important that we, again, ensure that we are safe, making sure that we are getting checked out, and also continue to push for these critical conversations, not just around the political process, but what are those decisions when you think about the vaccine as an example, and just a number of issues that we need to be vigilant around, but also continue to push for. And again, follow Politiscope. I'm really excited. Shout out to the whole team that brought the vision together for this. It's a great tool, and I look forward to all of the wonderful things that this organization through the app will accomplish.
Awesome. Thank you guys for that. Leah J. Lee, thank you guys so much for joining us today. These conversations are so necessary, and we appreciate you for lending your time and your expertise. Viewers, I hope you enjoyed our program tonight. It looks like daytime here because I'm in California, but be sure to stay informed and engaged and download the Politiscope app. So our next convo will cover Biden's first 100 days in office, and you will not want to miss it. Also, feel free to follow us on IG, Twitter, and Facebook at Politiscope. And tune into our weekly combos on Clubhouse every Thursday at 6 p.m. Eastern. I know if you got that invite and you're on Clubhouse, you'll see the room. So thanks, guys, for coming, and thanks, everybody, for watching.